Good evening. Tonight, our special investigation is into the topic of nuclear energy.
Nuclear energy has always been a controversial topic. Tonight, we are exploring all realms of the subject. We are hoping to provide a well-balanced background on the topic, the reasons for the use of nuclear energy, and the ways to move forward. We also highlight both the advantages of nuclear energy, but also the extreme risks that come with its use. We begin with an explanation on how nuclear energy is produced. The main difference in a nuclear power plant as opposed to other forms of power is that they do not burn any fuel. Instead, they use uranium in the form of fuel pellets to produce electricity through a process called fission. But before uranium can be used in a reactor, it must undergo processing steps to convert it to a usable form. After the uranium is mined, it is crushed, grounded up, and then treated with an acid solution. This gives the product of uranium oxide concentrate. From here, it needs to be converted into a gas called uranium hexafluoride, which enables it to be enriched. This allows the material to be more fissile. After the enrichment process, uranium hexafluoride is converted to uranium dioxide, a powder which is then pressed and formed into fuel pellets. Now, the uranium is ready to be used in a nuclear reactor. These fuel pellets are placed inside thin metal tubes, which are then assembled into bundles to become fuel elements for the core of the reactor. The heat created by the fission of the uranium atoms inside the rods brings the surrounding water to a boil. This in turn creates steam, which spins a turbine to drive a generator, producing electricity.
We now take you live to a video debate between Dr. Zellman and Dr. Svetlana discussing the opportunities and liabilities of nuclear energy.
Nuclear power is a clean, safe, reliable, and a competitive energy source. One of the main advantages of nuclear power is low pollution levels. It is the only source of energy that can replace a large part of fossil fuels such as coal, oil, and gas, which massively pollute the atmosphere and contribute to the greenhouse effect. Nuclear energy does not discharge greenhouse gases such as methane and carbon dioxide, and there's no unfavorable impact on water.
However, there are other major environmental concerns when it comes to the effects of nuclear energy. One of the biggest issues is its environmental impact. The process of mining and refining uranium is not a clean process. Transporting nuclear fuel to and from plants is a major pollution hazard. Also, once the fuel is used, you can't simply take it to the landfill. It's radioactive and dangerous. Nuclear power plants produce tremendous amount of nuclear waste which transmits radiation and high temperature and can damage the compartment containing it, resulting in severe environmental accidents.
Well, what about the considerably lower operating costs of nuclear power? It can produce relatively inexpensive electricity, and the uranium used in the process is of low cost. The normal life of a nuclear reactor is long and estimated between 50 to 70 years, depending on how often and how it's being used. One of the largest benefits of nuclear power is that it doesn't fall under the influence of fluctuating oil and gas prices. Although the initial expense of setting up nuclear power plants is moderately high, the cost of running them is low.
Moderately high? Actually, the cost is extremely high. It takes substantial investment to set up a nuclear power station. The construction and establishment of a nuclear power generator can take over 20 or more years, as there are many legal formalities to be completed. Also, nuclear plants are generally opposed by people who live nearby. Developing countries in particular are not always able to afford such a costly source of alternative energy.
I see your point, but nuclear power is far more reliable than many other sources. While solar and wind energy are dependent upon weather conditions, a nuclear power plant has no such constraints and can run without disruption in any climate condition. The best part is that this energy has a persistent supply. It is broadly accessible, there's a lot in storage, and the supply is going to last much longer than fossil fuels that are used in the same capacity.
But, just like other sources of fuel, uranium is also finite and only exists in few countries. Actually, there is a concern that the supply of uranium will only last the next 30 to 60 years in Western countries. Uranium is expensive to mine, refine, and transport. In addition, the more significant the safety precautions are, the higher the costs become. A considerable amount of waste is produced during these processes and can result in environmental contamination and also can have serious effects on human health.
Well, nuclear energy is far more proficient than other energy sources and is extremely energy dense compared to fossil fuels. The amount of fuel required by a nuclear power plant is relatively less than others, as energy released by nuclear fission is approximately 10 million times greater than the amount of energy released by fossil fuel atoms.
However, nuclear energy may be proficient, but it's important to keep in mind that despite a generally high security standard, nuclear accidents can and do happen. It is technically impossible to build a plant with 100% security, and a small probability of failure will always be present. The consequences of an accident are devastating both for human beings and for nature. Also, nuclear power plants as well as nuclear waste could be an easy target for terror attacks. No atomic energy plant in the world could withstand an attack similar to 9/11 and would have global catastrophic effects.
Catastrophe. The destination all roads potentially lead to when it comes to the use of nuclear energy. There have been a fair share of incidents over the course of history, but perhaps the worst of all recorded was the Chernobyl disaster.
April 26, 1986. Meltdown at Block 4 of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in the southwest of the Soviet Union. The equivalent radiation of 400 Hiroshima bombs is released. 400,000 people are forced from their homes forever. Clouds of radioactive dust drift across Europe, contamination on a continental scale. Hardest hit is an area of almost 1,100 square miles around the reactor.
Hi, I'm an environmentalist. Today I'll be briefly talking about the environmental impacts of the Chernobyl meltdown in 1986. Radioactive materials like iodine and caesium from the meltdown deposited on rivers, lakes, and some water reservoirs, both in areas close to the reactor site and in other parts of Europe. The amount of radioactive materials present in water bodies had significantly decreased during the first weeks after the initial deposition because the radioactive materials either decayed, were diluted, or were absorbed by the surrounding soils. Wildlife was affected during the meltdown. Fish absorbed radioactive iodine very quickly, but the levels decreased rapidly due to radioactive decay. However, bioaccumulation of radioactive caesium along the aquatic food chain resulted in high concentrations in fish in some lakes as far away as Scandinavia and Germany. Radioactive caesium also affected organisms in forest ecosystems, which impacted the animals and vegetation. Forest food products such as mushrooms, berries, and game contain the highest recorded levels of caesium-137.
So we've talked about how nuclear power can have severe environmental effects. But what are some of the potential effects on human health?
As you can see in this photo, radiation exposure has a massive effect on different regions of the body, such as the thyroid gland, lungs, red blood cells, stomach, small and large intestine, and the bone marrow. The extent of these effects is very dependent upon the level of exposure.
Hi, I'm Dr. Maitland, and today I'm going to tell you about the dangerous effects of nuclear power. As previously mentioned, a major concern about nuclear power is potentially devastating effects on human health. In general, nuclear power is less dangerous to the health of the population on a daily basis compared to things such as the burning of fossil fuels or coal. However, nuclear power plant accidents could and have happened, and these events cause massive exposures to radiation, which can have long-term health effects. The radiative isotopes released in power plant accidents include iodine-131 and cesium-137. But in severe accidents, such as Chernobyl, other dangerous isotopes can also be released, such as plutonium-239. Iodine-131 accumulates in the thyroid gland, which uses iodine to produce hormones to control how quickly the body uses energy. This can increase the chance of thyroid cancer for years to come after the exposure has occurred. This risk is the greatest within children and adolescents. An increased risk of leukemia has been seen in the cleanup crews who worked on Chernobyl and other power plant accidents, Radiation sickness is also common within workers of nuclear power plants during times of radiation exposure. Radiation sickness can cause nausea, coma, and even death. Over 6.5 million residents were exposed to radiation in the contaminated areas surrounding Chernobyl. Although some were in lower doses, and many didn't see any immediate health effects, nuclear power is definitely not a risk worth taking.
Now, we've seen earlier on in this video how important uranium is as a nuclear fuel. Although it is not the only nuclear fuel, as plutonium is used as well, it is the most abundantly used in most nuclear power plants around the world. In recent years, however, there has been great hype over a third nuclear alternative to plutonium and uranium. This alternative is said to be the great green hope of nuclear energy. It is called thorium. But does the reality really live up to the hype?
The supposed benefits for thorium as a clean nuclear alternative to uranium seem to carry much weight within the scientific community. Many have stipulated that thorium's fuel cycle produces less waste and is safer to process than uranium. Thorium is also said to produce more energy with less fuel as well as safe byproducts. Despite this, not everyone is so quick to praise the supposed fuel of the future. In fact, some scientists argue that the language used to describe the benefits of thorium is misleading and may very well be wholly inaccurate. Thorium's technology is fundamentally based on nuclear fission, and as such brings all the problems of nuclear fission along with it. In some aspects, yes, it does have advantages over uranium, but many of the inherent issues such as reactor safety and production of dangerous waste still remain despite what is being proclaimed. Some critics say that this new hype is a method of diverting attention and criticism away from the risk of nuclear energy and providing another excuse to feed massive amounts of money into the industry. The bottom line is that thorium is still nuclear energy. All things considered, whether or not it is better than uranium is essentially irrelevant. As has been shown, the same risks are there, and on top of that, it is unsustainable and unrenewable. Cleaner and safer alternatives to nuclear energy do exist. From an environmental perspective, solar power is arguably one of the best known alternative sources of energy. It is sustainable, renewable, and pollution-free. In fact, scientists stipulate that solar power can keep 110,000 pounds of carbon dioxide, the chief greenhouse gas, out of the atmosphere for the next 25 years. On top of that, geographically, it's found throughout the world, it can power remote areas, and the cost of maintaining solar systems is relatively low. Wind energy is another alternative. Just like solar energy, it is sustainable, renewable, and does not generate greenhouse gas emissions. The worldwide potential of wind power is huge. In fact, research has shown that it can produce 20 times more power than what the entire human population needs. Wind turbines are also very space efficient, and with falling prices and low operation costs, this energy source is very promising. Another source is hydrogen energy. Although it may take some work to get to it, there is no element on this planet that is as infinite as hydrogen. Another strong benefit is that it produces no harmful effects when it burns for fuel. Hydrogen is also non-toxic, something that is a clear contrast with nuclear energy, and can be obtained in a safe manner.
The nuclear debate is ongoing, and with the hype over thorium, it would seem as though many remain enthralled with the idea of nuclear potential. Although the aforementioned alternatives are not without their flaws, the potential effects of nuclear power are just too dangerous to ignore, and they will always be there. The only move to make is a move towards sustainability. That is our future.